Hello. So we are here for the second deep dive into Editor Lite. We'll see how deep this dive will be, but we definitely aim for some deep anyway. So the agenda for today's meeting, so that you could fill out the questions if you have any. Is going to be our regular editors agenda, editor group meetings agenda document. I put the links to slides and video from the very first deep dive into that document. I'm gonna share the document in chat, I guess, so that you could get there sooner. We are going to talk briefly to cover, because Enrique was at the very first deep dive. I'm not sure about Paul and Chad, and Roman wasn't there either. So I will make sure that we cover some very basics there now as well, just to have it logically evaluated into or evolving into what Editor Lite is now. So let's start there. I've put questions only after the introduction, but feel free to write questions anywhere in that section for the meeting. So let's start. So how the Editor Lite came to life in general. All the way from the beginning of this group, the editor group, I believe it was the end of 2019. All the way from that moment, we were talking about unifying the editing experience across the product, because we had, at that moment, we had two editors. We had ACE editor for editing the single file instances, single file editing, and it across the documentation is still called a single file editor. And we had WebID, right? So WebID was this full ID experience. And no, Roman, this was not January 2020, because I'm talking about very beginning of how the Editor Lite actually came to this idea. So we were talking about unifying the experience, the editing experience, in this more or less lightweight ACE and full-size WebID editors. And the path we were talking about was to move the WebID into all of these instances of the editing experience. And by now, apparently you didn't know how heavy the WebID is and what a pleasure it would be to move WebID to all of those editing instances. It would be very challenging. Hence, we were discussing this, but it felt like a permanent discussion, ever-going discussion, because it was really hard to find a point where we would start thinking, yeah, okay, we start moving WebID, for example, to edit the single files, simple files in the repository. So we never started approaching that idea, really. But then in January 2020, as Roman already posted, we discussed the situation with him, and we came to some Roman just threw this idea of why not to approach this from the other side. Stop the spoilers, Roman. Yeah. So we were thinking about whether we have other options instead of moving this really heavy application that is really monolithic one, the WebID, into all of the editing instances. Is there any other way to unify the editing experience? And we thought, okay, what if we start small and actually flip this problem and go from the smallest possible footprint all the way to WebID and unify this, the editing experience this way. So that idea really was interesting, and I went on and built the very first proof of concept based on Monaco as the main engine for the WebID, and that was technically the beginning of the Editor Lite. So really simple proof of concept where we wanted to, in the beginning, the Editor Lite had to have just one purpose, to replace ACE. So it had to be very bare bone, very lightweight wrapper around Monaco. Monaco editor, because we have Monaco in WebID as well. And then in the future, it would make the transition or unification of the editing experience much simpler for the whole product. So we started taking baby steps towards this, but several milestones and months forward I believe in September, or yeah, it was the end of September, I think, we finally got rid of ACE in the code base. Or no, it was October actually. We got rid of ACE and we replaced all the instances of ACE with Editor Lite. So now we do have a very good solid base for unification, real unification of the editing experiences. But unfortunately, up until now, Editor Lite wasn't one of our group's core products. So it was still sort of like an afterthought, and probably partly due to my inability to communicate how awesome it is, even though I stress this very hard all the time. Probably my inability to communicate how this approach might help us in the future was the reason for that. But now, thankfully, we are getting to the idea that this is one of our core products. So now it's time to figure out what is Editor Lite, so that the whole group could be involved, the whole group could participate in discussions, and it would be more like group level product. So do we have any questions about like this prerequisites for Editor Lite? No. Okay. Enrique, you thought about something? No?
No, I feel that you answered my question. I was going to ask what was the first place where Monaco was used, and it was a web IDE, right?
Yeah.
Then we spread it through other
yes.
places.
Yes. So technically, when we were implementing web IDE, ACE was already in the code base, but it was much sort of, we always wanted this sort of paramount idea of building the second VS Code, right? So what is the sort of idealistic editing environment? It's VS Code that is familiar to most of the developers, and it makes a lot of sense to provide similar editing experience in the browser, similar to what users have on their desktops. So that's why we used the same engine that drives VS Code, Monaco, even though we already had ACE in the code base. But we didn't see a lot of future in the ACE, and hence we started with Monaco. But then we sort of put ourselves intentionally into the situation when we said, okay, now we have two editors and we need to unify the editing experience. So that's how we came to this situation when we had to replace ACE with Monaco, and now we are talking about using the same thing in WebID, sort of like circular dependency, but eventually we are going to get out of this, I believe. So the Editor Lite architecture. This is a very interesting point. So from the very beginning, Editor Lite has been intended to be a very, very lightweight wrapper around Monaco. It does provide very basic, unique functionality to Editor Lite, but still, in essence, it's still very close to Monaco basis. On top of that basis, Editor Lite builds some cogs to work better specifically in GitLab product. The main power of Editor Lite comes from the extensions. We're going to talk about them in a second. But technically, Editor Lite core is the glue between Monaco and the extensions. We do not build in heavy functionality in the editor core. All the heavy functionality goes into the extensions. The task of Editor Lite to be as little intrusive into the process of communicating between extensions and Monaco as possible by providing convenient API, convenient bridges between Monaco and extensions. Editor Lite itself, Editor Lite core is framework agnostic, so that it would be possible to use it in GitLab product in all the instances of our views, not only Vue-based. So it's possible to use it in Vue, it's possible to use it in HAML views. It will be possible if at some point we decide to ditch Vue and go to React, God forbid. We are going to be fine there as well. So Editor Lite will just keep working. Yeah, React. So that is sort of in the DNA of Editor Lite. It has to be framework agnostic for it to be universal enough. Also, we have more than just GitLab product. We have different projects, and it should be possible to use Editor Lite in those projects as well, should we need that. So yes, Svelte is a really nice one as well, and it's actually a really nice tool, but it doesn't get enough traction yet, in my opinion, to be properly considered as an alternative to Vue, for example. But it's a really nice one. They took good parts from Vue and good parts from Web Components and Polymer, and like those things I just love. So, but yes, I won't be distracted if you don't distract me. Okay, so the Editor Lite core is supposed to stay solid and very lightweight. That's the main idea. As I said, all the power comes from the extensions. But before we get to the extensions, do we have any questions about the core of Editor Lite? No. Wonderful. So extensions. This is the most powerful part of Editor Lite. And surprisingly, it's not even, as I said, it's not even part of, or sort of integral part of Editor Lite. It is usually the standalone thing. So what is the extension in Editor Lite's world? Extensions, in essence, these are just simple JavaScript objects that take their methods and extend the instance of the editor. When I say instance of the editor, it's worth mentioning that Editor Lite allows you to create a core, sort of global editor, and create some instances of this editor. Why is it important? Let's assume we are on the multi-file snippet editing page. In this case, in this scenario, we can create one global editor object with some properties that are important for snippets, for blobs in the snippets. Then for every blob, we create an instance of this global editor. Every instance will inherit the properties of the global editor, but it's possible to extend every single instance with its own properties, so that we are mixing the properties of the instance into the global, or sort of the other way around. We mix in the properties of the global editor into the instance, and have the possibility of creating properties for that particular instance. Like what kind of properties can it be? Like we have blobs for different extensions. For example, we have blob for Markdown file and JavaScript file. In this particular case, we might want to provide different settings. For example, for JavaScript file, we might say, okay, we provide the minimap for editing JavaScript files, but we don't want to provide this for a Markdown or vice versa. So that sort of things. All the, when I'm saying about the options, the properties for instance and the global editor, all of those come from bare Monaco. So all of the options that you can find, if you can find those in the documentation for Monaco, and that's really challenging, but if you can find those options, all of them will work both for the global editor object and for each particular instance. Editor Lite doesn't add anything on top of that. We have all those bare options here. So again, getting back to the extensions. Extension extends the properties of a particular instance, not the global editor, but particular instance. Editor Lite still provides the abstraction to extend all of the instances of this the global editor. So we can create global editor object, and then say editor.use, and then the list of the extensions to use. Those extensions will be applied to all of the instances of this global editor. But we can also do call use method on the particular instance. And then only that particular instance will get the extensions that we are about to apply. So we came to the core thing. .use, this is the construction that we will be using most often when we deal with extensions. It follows the paradigm introduced in Vue, where to use a plugin for Vue, you type vue.use, and then the plugins you want to use. The same thing here. You type in editor or instance.use, and then the list or just specific extension to use. Extension takes its methods and extends the instance. Now, there is the merge request that is assigned to Enrique now as maintainer, but we are very close, I hope we're very close to the situation when extensions can be defined in more than one way. So, as I said, extensions in general are simple objects. So technically, let me just share my screen to show you how this can be used. Share screen, and we are going to share desktop too. So we close this one and we open this one. Right, so let's get to, I believe, Editor Lite spec. Right, so here's the spec that explains what can extend an instance. So we can use ES6 classes. We can use multiple ES6 classes passed as an array. We can use simple object that is just the inline object. You can say instance.use, and then you pass raw JavaScript object with methods to extend the instance. You don't need a separate extension file to do that if we are talking about just one-off use case of this extension.
Do you have a practical example for these kind of things?
Yeah. For example, let's
like just verbalizing.
Yeah.
For example, you don't need to.
Let's say I'm again getting back to this multi-file snippets example, right? So we have several instances. For example, we have 5 blobs, right? All of them for different file extensions, and there is just one instance, for example, for the YAML file, right? So the blob representing YAML file, and we want to say, okay, for this particular instance of the YAML file, we want this instance to provide some functionality, like when I click somewhere in the field, it will pop up an alert to me or something like this. We don't want this to be used by any other instance on this page. And we know that this is not going to be used by any other instance anywhere in the product. So it's just one-off thing, for example, to notify user about something. We can say, okay, when we change the file name, for example, in this instance, we want to notify user that we are reapplying the IntelliSense and syntax highlighting. And this is for one particular instance. It's not going to be reused anywhere else. It's not to say that this is the preferred way of extending instances. It's just there for very simple use cases. In reality, most, like 99% of the extensions will obviously be stored in the separate files. And those files will be either plain JavaScript objects or ES6 classes. So let's take a look at the plain JavaScript object in this particular spec, for example. So For example, all of these are right. For example, this is a valid extension for, let me just increase this. This is the valid extension for the instance of Editor Lite. So out of the box, instance of the Editor Lite won't have the method foo, but we want it to provide this method for some reason, for some particular file extension, or for some particular scenario where this might be useful, right? So for this method to be available to the instance, we can say, like, I'm not talking about how we got to the instance thing, but we say instance use, and then we say, okay, this is it. Now, after this, instance foo, foo will return foo res. That is just the string, I believe. Oh no, it's just this sort of mock thing. And yeah, so this is the simplest way. In reality, obviously, you will have several methods that probably work together. And the best example of how this is implemented will probably be, let me just get to nope, Editor Lite and Markdown extension. So, right, if we get rid of this Markdown extension, right, well, let me just do it this way. So this is the Markdown extension as it is in master now. So it's just the default, the JavaScript object, where we have several methods to work with Markdown files. Whenever we initialize the instance of the Editor Lite to work with Markdown file, it's probably smart to include this extension into and use it in Editor Lite, because it provides some handy editing capabilities when one clicks, for example, on the toolbar, clicks to add the bolded text or underscore text or like italicized text. So all of this handle this thing. And initially, this extension has been implemented following the API of ACE, so that Editor Lite could be plug and play solution for the instances where ACE was used for Markdown files. So these files might be not very descriptive, even though they are to some certain extent, but they follow the API provided by ACE previously. Nowadays, or not nowadays, but with the merge request in progress now in review at maintainer level, we switch to defining extensions as ES6 classes in addition to the standard JavaScript objects. So these two can be used properly together side by side, but there are some cases when we want to set up Editor Lite from our extension, and in this case, we want to send some configuration options to our extension, and in this case, achieving this with simple JavaScript object is nearly impossible, because it won't work as sort of setting up the extension. It will work as just method on the instance, and we don't want to expose all our configuration options on the instance to be publicly available. So we want to set up our extension before it gets applied, before it gets used by the editor. So because of this, we are starting supporting the ES6 classes. In this particular case, it doesn't have the constructor, and we still fall back to the same list of the methods. But under the hood, we do use the constructor in this particular case. It's just we create the base class that handles the things and stores all the configuration options for this extension. Plus, it keeps the reference to the instance. So The challenge
So
with
in a nutshell, the reason for using ES6 classes is so that you can pre-configure it and have the state stored with it
exactly
before it's applied.
exactly. So that when, for example, when we run, let's say, I don't know, like replace selected text method on our instance after we applied this this extension, this method would know our configuration options for this extension and could use it for doing that or another thing. So ES6 classes are used exactly for that thing. But there is one challenge with ES6 classes. And in particular, when they are used in Editor Lite. So we use this new and class name construction when we initialize the ES6 classes. And this is where we call the constructor. The problem is that at this moment, our constructor knows nothing about instance. So we use our extension only later in the process. We say instance.use and then our extension. But at that moment, our extension already has to be configured. So constructor and the actual methods are called with different this keyword, so to speak. When you initialize the extension as ES6 class, this points to the extension module itself. When you call a method later in the process, for example, replace selected text later on, this will point to the instance on which you're running this extension. So there is the lack of this synchronization. So we have two options. First, or like not two options. We still have to, if you want to store our configuration options, we have to pass instance to our constructor. So how it's done? Well, in this particular case, we don't send anything because we don't need any configuration options. But this is how we deal with ES6 classes. So in this particular case, we get it dynamically imported dynamically. Then we say this editor, this is actually the instance. We say use and then new markdown extension. This will apply this markdown extension. In this particular case, again, we do not need any configuration options, so we can omit both instance and options. We just initialize the extension. But if we would be about setting up this extension, we would have to send instance and pointing to this editor. Then we would send the object with options, or like, I don't know, like foobar, if we want to use this as the configuration option. Oh, right. I'm sorry. We can do it just like this. So we will, if we need to use this configuration option later in our methods, this is how we would do this. There is a test, obviously, for all possible configurations of running this constructor. So, and there is one scenario, particular scenario, where we throw an error using this extension. It's when we pass the options, but we don't say which instance to apply these options to. This base extension is sort of a helper, so that we could, in real extensions, we could extend it. But nobody prevents you from not extending that that thing and doing just your, oops, that's not going to work out. From doing your own constructor thing. No problem here. Just keep in mind that in order to store the configuration options, you have to pass the instance. The problem with these configuration options now is that if you take a look at this code, this line, at the moment, we follow the same principle as with extensions. We extend the instance itself with the configuration options. This means that we are polluting the global instance scope. This is bad, I know that, but since we don't have any danger from this, because no extension uses configuration options yet, I'm fine with having as this, because we already have an issue where I have the plan and I already have the proof of concept for introducing the extensions registry for a global editor object, where we could store configuration options for every extension in a scoped manner. And then every extension would have access to its own properties without polluting the global scope of the instance. This is how the extensions work. I know this is quite chaotic, so please do ask the questions.
There are some questions in the document. I can verbalize them.
Let's verbalize those if you don't mind.
Cool. So Paul asked a question about mixing properties into the Monaco instance, and I have a related question. So just verbalizing it literally, it looks like extensions mixing their properties to the Monaco instance. What if two extensions have the same method? Yes. My related question is, what is the motivation behind the design decision of extending the Monaco instance itself?
The motivation is pretty simple. We need to keep the core of the Editor Lite as simple as possible, and to prevent, actually, to reduce the clashes of names technically. So answering, I will start from the beginning. So what happens if, let's say, instance has the same method named exactly the same as our instance, or if two extensions get applied and both of them have method with exactly the same name, right? So what happens? As simple as the last one wins at the moment. So if we have two extensions with exactly the same name, with exactly same named method, the last extension that is applied wins, and the previous the same method from the first extension will be vanished. So that's obviously not ideal solution, but this is by far the simplest one now, when we have very limited number of extensions and all of the extensions are very well controlled. So we know what names the methods in our extensions have. The reason behind this was very simple. We needed this to be fast, simple, and reliable. It's not reliable in terms of like naming conflicts, but again, as I said, there is an MR in the pipeline that is like work in progress for me now, to create the registry for the extensions. So technically, I'm still playing with the idea of how to architect this registry of the extensions, but obviously it will deal with the things that with reinstantiating an extension. What does it mean? Let's say you are editing a file, and you, for example, start editing it as Markdown file, right? So we pull in the Markdown extension. Then, for some reason, while you're editing this file, you change it to, for example, foo.txt. So we have to get rid of the Markdown extensions so that they don't stand in the way. But then you change your decision again and switch it back to Markdown. We don't want to re-download the extension and reapply it. We want it to be available to us right now. So that's where we reach out to the registry on the global editor and pull in the already existing and already pre-configured Markdown extension. This is even more important for multi-file solutions where we have several instances of the editor on the same page, for example, multi-file snippets, where we we have different, let's say we start with one file, a Markdown file, right? And then we pull in the Markdown extensions and we put them into the registry, in the global registry of our editor. Then we click add new file and we create another Markdown file. So it only makes sense to reach out to the registry, and without re-downloading the extension or redoing any other configuration, we just pull in the existing Markdown extension with pre-configured options and apply to this newly created blob. So it helps us to be very performant with this editor, and at the same time save resources by by reducing the round trips. In this work of creating this registry for the extensions, I will keep in mind how we might solve this naming conflict situation. There is no guarantee that it will be solved at the moment. It has to be solved eventually, but maybe not at this stage. I still keep this in mind, but the cases, like to me, solving this problem right now isn't really worth time investment at the moment, because, as I said, we have very limited number of extensions and all of them are very well controlled. And if you technically, it's very, very early, discoverable very early in the process. If you try to call some method on the instance and it does something completely random that you don't expect, you just see that, okay, I did something wrong with my naming for the methods apparently. So that's something. I will probably put some warnings. So throw some warnings to say like, okay, we have the naming conflict, but don't think we have to go further than that for now. Does it answer the question?
Yes, thank you, Dennis.
Cool, thank you. So yes, and you have. So it was the question from Paul, and then, yeah, you've asked your question as well, right? So again, my main idea behind the Editor Lite is that the Editor Lite core itself has to be as simple, as lightweight as possible, and all the heavy lifting has to happen in the extensions, because extensions have all the context of the instance, so they have access to instance, they have access to all the other extensions. So it's like the ecosystem there is pretty well defined. All the components of the system know about the existence of each other, but the core of the editor, the main task of the core of this editor, is to just establish the communication between these different parts, not more than that. Yes, so Roman is writing the question. Do you want to voice it?
I had one question, yeah. So I'm curious, like, what is your general vision or so for the extensions going forward? Like you mentioned a few, like with the Markdown one or so, or kind of the YAML linting, let's say, right? What is your vision for saying, okay, how can I, or we as a team, how can we help like drive this forward in general to say, okay, like how should we think about extensions and how should we kind of like think about it that we want to drive the adoption within GitLab? Do we have to maintain all extensions that our teams are writing? Do we have to help them? Or
this is a
like,
very, very good question. So let me start, in this case, let me start from the end of the question. So should we, as the team, write all of these extensions? And the answer is definitely not. This is the main benefit of using Editor Lite as it is now, and using the using this architecture as the basis, so that heavy lifting is done in the extension. So any group, absolutely any group, can write an extension for Editor Lite, because this is, as I said, just a plain JavaScript object. You just think about it as something that gives you the editor with this keyword. If you want to do something with the editor, it's with the instance of this editor, you just use this keyword. Otherwise, it's all just a plain JavaScript object. So any group can write any extension for themselves. And we are, at the moment, at least one other group is writing their own extension, Pipeline Authoring. Has their own extension to validate the GitLab CI YAML file in Editor Lite. And they are going to maintain it. They are going to own this extension. Should we need a similar extension, we can either extend that extension, write our own extension, or just use that extension for our needs as well. So there are different opportunities, but absolutely no, we should not write all of the extensions ourselves. Now, the very, very important question is, how do we increase the traction, or like not actually do the contrary? How do we increase the adoption of the Editor Lite in the product? This is a very good question. I believe that we should find some balance where we replace, we still have plenty of fields where editing experience is delivered with just text areas. I'm not talking about the discussions or notes. We know how that story goes now in the group, right? But there are other places, other instances in the product where we're talking about really editing of something, but only the text area is used for that purpose there. So we could extend those places. Over time, when we go with Editor Lite and start implementing it as the basis for WebID, we will inevitably build some other extensions anyway, and those will be owned by us, and those can be reused by other groups. At the moment, I have, let me just check this. I have the proof of concepts. Again, when we were discussing things with the pipeline authoring group, they reached out to me to give the perspective on whether they should go with WebID or Editor Lite. And obviously, I did my best to be as neutral as possible, but for their particular use case, Editor Lite made much more sense. So, and I built some prototypes. So technically, I have the proof of concept with live preview for Markdown. I think you've already seen that. That should be wrapped into proper extension. We have, let me check. So yes, we have the inline editing. Like this, the inline editing will be probably the place that brings Editor Lite to as many places in the product as possible. So if we are able to come up with an interface where we can inline edit using the Editor Lite, and this is totally possible, I showed this with snippets, then the adoption will be much better. I have the proof of concept where we have the div editor for Editor Lite, where, for example, you type in something and you get the div building up right there for your document. So you're writing the things, you're changing, you're adding, you're removing, and then you have the div right here. This is one more thing that was important for pipeline authoring team. This is very convenient, and the cool thing is that since we are using the using Monaco under the hood, we can create the div editor in read mode. So like right now it is even editable. So you can edit and you have all these changes visible right where you are editing. But we can split it into the separate panel where we that we show in read-only mode, and we show all the the full div. For example, it might be convenient when you're dealing with several files, and before you commit, we show this, right, as we do in WebID, but it might be useful for the single file editing experience as well. If you are making a lot of changes in one file, having the div right here might be very useful anyway. A tabbed multi-files view, I have the proof of concept for that. So when we create something that looks kind of similar to WebID with several tabs, but we have one global editor object, and every tab represents one instance of this global object. And that's pretty easy to build the multi-file interface with Editor Lite as well. So that's like, there are a lot of other use cases that we might be talking about, but my main vision for the extensions is that now we are reaching this interesting point where technically with the registry of the extensions, I will probably reach some sort of internal milestone of putting the extensions to the point where I want them to be to be able to call them more or less mature solution. But again, I'm sorry.
No worries. I have a question. The same, in the same theme of the future and how Editor Lite will evolve in relation to the Web ID. So, what role do you see Editor Lite playing in the Web ID? Like right now, it represents the source editor, right? Like the core component where the user edits a source file.
Yep.
So how do you see that evolving? Like will it provide more features than that? How do you see that growing?
Again, I don't see Editor Lite core growing on features, at least not extensively. Like it will stay core to the very, very basic wrapper around Monaco. All the functionality, all the heavy lifting will happen in extensions. So we can create extension that does a lot of heavy lifting thing, and then add one more extension on top of that to provide some other functionality. But I don't envision Editor Lite to grow, Editor Lite itself to grow significantly, the core. When it comes to the extensions, that's where all the magic will happen and all the exciting things will be. When it comes to Editor Lite, the idea is to start very, very light and just replace the implementation of the editor.js in WebID with Editor Lite. Then, technically, we take the functionality that is missing after this move, right? We do it in the same iteration, obviously, but we start with introducing the Editor Lite, and then we take the functionality that is not there, but was the difficulty with WebID is that tons of functionality has been implemented as part of the core editor in WebID, and now the challenge is to take it out, wrap it into an extension, and saying like, this is WebID extension. And ideally split it even further. So technically, in my idea, the core, like the editing of the file is going to be the Editor Lite core, right? Like with extensions based on the file extension. Then tabs each tab represents one instance of the Editor Lite. On top of this, we have global editor object. Then we have the panel on the left side. This panel is going to be that thing that I called panel widget, right? We didn't talk about panel widgets now, but that's something for the next deep dive. So panel widget is the panel. It extends the paradigm of widgets in Monaco. So Monaco comes bundled with two types of widgets. The content widget and overlay widget. The content widget is the widget that is shown as on top of your content. So you specify the line number and the column number where you show some information. For example, like validation of some syntax. So you can pop up a content widget. So when you scroll, the content widget will be tightly coupled with the place you initialize it. There is the paradigm of the overlay widget. It's something that, for example, when you use VS Code with Minimap represents something that it's technically not an overlay widget, but it represents the same paradigm. So it's something absolutely positioned within the editor, within your editor. So like, I don't know, again, some information about like some validation of your document, again, like how many like failures, how many problems or warnings, something like this. When you scroll, the overlay widget stays intact, stays on the same place. So it's in your site all the time. Editor Lite extends, like not in master yet. Again, this is work in progress. Editor Lite is going to extend these paradigms with the panel widget. What is panel widget? You can find it in my in my POC for the WYSIWYG editor, right? So the panel widget is something that creates the panel outside of your editor editor frame. It can be placed on top of the editor, on sides, or below the editor. And you can technically add any, right, we lost Enrique. But okay, we're still recording, so I will keep going. So the panel widget paradigm creates a panel that is still tightly coupled with the editor. It knows about anything happening in the editor, but it is outside of your editing context, kind of. So using the paradigm of panel widget, we can build, and getting back to the Web IDE story, using the paradigm of the panel widget, we can build the navigation tree on the side of the editor. We can build the side panel as the panel widget. We can do different things like this with extensions. So, for example, the side panel with navigation tree is going to be the panel widget that comes from its own extension. Then side panel on the right is going to come from its own extension. And we completely decouple the editor from those things, yet it's going to be the editor that orchestrates all of those pieces. And all of those pieces through the editor will be familiar and will know about context of all other pieces. So this way we can, relying on a very granular, very sort of discrete basis, build something that is very solid. And the best thing is it's going to be very, very scalable. So we won't be afraid of building the same heavy Web IDE application anymore, because it will be very easy to detach parts of it. And if we have any problem with, or like performance problem, let's say, like, because it's very close to my heart at the moment, if we have any problem with performance, we will be able to work with solving that problem in a very isolated manner within one extension, very scoped, and this will allow us to deal with the problems very, very isolated and very well located. So that's how I see Editor Lite sneaking into Web IDE gradually and providing us with more or less sane experience and sane, and using this thing, we can say every extension is dealing with its own store or whatever. Like, we can create the global store, obviously, because we need to share some information between different extensions, right? But we can totally make every component, every extension deal with its own storage, deal with its own part of the store. So connect, for example, the navigation tree, connect to GraphQL, connect some sidebar to Vuex, and then we can build this application in a very isolated manner for every bit. That's my vision.
Cool.
So,
thank you.
What
Jeff?
do you see happening if there's extensions that somehow need to communicate or share state? Like the Markdown extension needs to know something from a WYSIWYG extension, or like for the WYSIWYG editor, like Markdown and a ERB parser are needing to collaborate because it's the same document, or some example like that.
This is a very, very good question, Chad. So Editor Lite, we have only 2 minutes. I will try to make it. So Editor Lite itself is totally framework agnostic, right? But that said, nothing prevents you from building your extensions in any framework you want. Do you want to pull in React? Feel free. Do you want to pull in Vue? Feel free. You build your extension with Vue. Now, when you want to create 2 extensions that share the same store, you create the store on top level, and then in both of your extensions, you import that store and connect both of your extensions to exactly the same store. And that's how they communicate. So that's as easy as that.
So this is not really understanding how the Monaco API works. Is there some sort of editing lifecycle that, like, the editor has the instance of the document that was passed in when it was created, but the instances have to somehow to be coordinated to happen in the right order.
Uh, there are some callbacks or like events that Monaco emits, obviously, when, for example, the content is changed or the focus got obtained by the editor. So any extension can listen to those events and provide some processing based on that information. So when editor updates the content, all of the extensions can listen to this event and do their own work. They can put things in the store, they can do anything. Should we ever have a conflict of both two extensions trying to write to the same store with exactly the same value or something? Probably at some point we might get to this, but I don't believe we will experience it anytime soon.
There could be one extension that combines those other extensions
Exactly.
and exposes it.
This is the beauty. Thank you, Roman. So this is the beauty where you technically, outside of, like, once you get to the extensions level, you are free to build it anyhow you want. Editor Lite doesn't care about this. What Editor Lite does is provides the bridge for your extension to Monaco and from Monaco to your extension. So it's up to you to decide how you want to sort of exploit that information, right? So you can build one Mata extension that dispatches things to other extensions or something like this. And Editor Lite won't object that architecture at all. So it's very non-opinionated thing. This is the beauty. It's non-opinionated editing experience where, as I said, all the power and all the responsibility, should we say that, is on the extensions and the authors of the extensions. So how we approach that architecturally, that's another thing, like how we want to build those extensions, how we want to orchestrate those. This is going to be another thing. But we take small steps because, as I said, if we build extensions for different components, combining them or splitting them will be very trivial because they are sort of like Lego blocks. So that's the beauty of this architecture. We can build anything. That's why it's so scalable. We can build anything. Now, if we go back to, for example, what is called single file editor at the moment, when you go to the repository, open a file and click edit. Using this, we will be able to provide the multi-file editing experience there where we say, okay, for this instance of the Editor Lite, please pull in this file tree extension. And it will provide you with the list of the files, and you will be able to click a file, open a tab, and edit another file within the repository. But we can provide this gradually. Sort of, we do not pull in the whole monstrous web IDE to the user. User starts easy, starts simple. For example, the ideal path is user creates a new file in the repository. Right now, they get the bare minimum, just plain Editor Lite, no extensions applied whatsoever because we don't have any extension yet. User types in the name of the file and puts the extension. We know that for that extension, we need to pull in that and that extension. We do that. Then user does some other action. We pull in another extensions to extend this editing experience. And that's how, and then the user, for example, clicks the tab like show nav tree in the toolbar. That's where we pull in this extension for the navigation tree. And we are going to be able to build extensible user experience for editing. And this is super cool in my opinion. This is the most powerful part of this editor. So yeah, it went 3 minutes over the limit, but I hope it was useful, at least for you. You are the only one left here.
No, I think it's good. And to bring up my favorite point, I think like that's another example of metadata state that if we ever want to save and restore sessions, that would be an example. Like, what extensions am I using for editing this particular file? Okay, well, maybe we renamed or deprecated one of them, but then when they came back and restored that state, it's like, oh, I was using this extension. What do I do with it? Is it not applicable or what? That's
yeah.
sort of metadata.
Yeah, but again, like before getting to the point of like storing and like reacting to the changes in schema, we really need to iron like some simple paths, because that one will be really challenging. How we implement that part, it's like it's gonna take the whole milestone of just discussions, I guess, and prototyping. But if we have all the simple and basic parts in place for that to happen properly, then I don't see any reason not to deal with that part.
Well, thanks for this. Overall, I think it looks great. And
Yep,
yeah,
thank you.
the little that I've worked in the web IDE, I'm much more decoupled and cohesive experience.
I think
would
you are
be
one of the.
a tremendous improvement.
Yeah, I think you're one of those people who actually know how complex doing things in WebID can be. Like when you're developing things, right? So, and things can get really untapped very fast.
Yeah, I mean that as my first experience ever in a GitLab code base, I think was.
Yeah, I
Maybe it was
remember that.
good.
I remember that.
Anyway, thanks a lot. Great job.
Thank you very much. Thank you, man. So yes, I'm stopping the recording.